My name is Craig Zamry. I'm a business consultant with the Small Business Development Center. The Ohio SBDC at YSU would like to welcome Jim Rafeedie from Keylan to deliver their social selling webinar. Jim brings over 35 years of experience in sales and sales management to Keylan and its clients. He's worked extensively with organizations of virtually all sizes, spanning almost every geography and industry. His structured, methodical approach to sales stems from several decades of working at ADP, a global leader in human capital management. This, coupled with his years at Oracle in the highly competitive software industry, provides him with the expertise to effectively lead sales teams. Jim, welcome, and at this time, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thanks very much, Craig. And good morning, everyone. As we begin, Craig, I not only want to thank you, but I want to thank Ohio SBDC at YSU for this opportunity. And I want to thank our attendees. I appreciate that each and every one of you has a number of things to do today. So I appreciate, and Craig appreciates, the fact that you take this time to join us. And many of you may be working from your homes. With any luck whatsoever, during the time we spend together, you'll be able to block out any distractions, whether that's being asked for assistance with homework or what have you. So thanks again. So let's go ahead and get started. As Craig mentioned, our topic today is leveraging social selling. And as you notice on the title slide, there's a couple sub-themes to this. One is maximizing LinkedIn to increase new prospect appointments, and then more specifically, leveraging your centers of influence. And likewise, another sub-theme is turning from cold calling into social selling. Our agenda, I'll provide you with a brief overview of Keylan, the organization that I'm with. I'll tell you the difference between social selling and traditional selling and why it's an imperative to employ social selling. We'll look at the return on investment for social selling. We'll be very prescriptive as to the process of employing social selling. I'll provide you with a summary, and again, so that's our agenda. Who is Keylan? What Keylan is best known for is fractional sales management services. I have a few slides on this in a moment, but think of this simply as employing the services of a sales manager or sales executive on a part-time basis. We also provide services for executive coaching and strategic planning, sales and leadership development, and we help organizations to implement traction, also known as the entrepreneurial operating system, which is a methodology for small and medium-sized businesses to assist with their strategic planning and execution. And this was popularized in the book Traction by Gino Wickman. The approach we take in working with our clients is predicated on establishing very professional and transparent relationships with our clients and with, in this context, the salespeople that we manage. So behind that, there's a couple books and concepts. You may be familiar with both. One is Crucial Conversations, and the other is Emotional Intelligence. And I would encourage you, to the extent that you're involved in management, if you're unfamiliar with these books, they're required reading, in our view, for successful management. So what is fractional sales management? Every one of you is familiar with outsourcing. In one way or another, you probably already use outsourcing. With the exception of recent months, you probably paid somebody to, let's say, cut your hair. That is outsourcing. You could do it yourself. It might not be the same quality, may not be as efficient, and in the long run, it may actually cost you more. But seriously, though, there's some areas that are commonly outsourced that are listed here. Payroll is a common one, the accounting function. Most organizations outsource their legal counsel, employ, if you will, third-party attorneys. So the same concept is applied to sales management. Now, why would that be? Well, our typical client is a small to mid-sized business. And oftentimes what that means is that the business owner has the responsibility not only for running the entire business, but oftentimes has the responsibility to also manage the sales team. The owners aren't always professional salespeople. They may not have a background in selling. They may not have a background in sales management. And they simply may not have the time to do those things, even if they have the skills. But to hire a full-time sales manager or sales executive is impractical for many small businesses, such as those that have 1 or 2 or 3 salespeople. It just isn't financially practical. So those are a good fit, if you will, for fractional sales management. As I said, the typical small to medium-sized business owner, and based on those of you on this call, I know some of you are in that role and can appreciate this slide. The typical role includes numerous functional areas and responsibilities: operations, marketing, research, staffing, the back office, and the front office, sales. They could, and they certainly in many cases do, hold on to the sales function. But holding on sometimes is more damaging than letting go. And why is that? By holding on, it could be that this owner doesn't have the time to develop clarity around their sales process or their expectations of their salespeople. They don't have the time to work with them, to hold them accountable. They don't have the time to observe them in action. And you can appreciate that these shortcomings oftentimes lead to turnover within the selling role. But on the flip side, by letting go, what we've seen is this gives owners more time. As the expression goes, it allows them to work on the business versus in the business. Sales increase, stress is lower, morale is higher. So that's a little bit about Keylan. Now let's get into the heart of the subject: social selling. And utilizing LinkedIn is a key, a very big key and essential to social selling. So what is LinkedIn? And by the way, I took the time to go out on LinkedIn to look for your profiles. And I can tell by that some are quite familiar with LinkedIn, and others, at least from my quick view, perhaps are not quite as familiar or don't use it quite as commonly. So let me tell you a little bit about LinkedIn and why it's an essential for this aspect of selling, social selling. So it's an organization that's been around for just short of 20 years, currently has over 700 million members. And these would be members who are business professionals, because this is a network for business professionals. It's in use. These members are using it in some 200 countries. About 40% of the members access LinkedIn every day. And to validate the worth, if you will, of LinkedIn in the business community, Microsoft acquired LinkedIn in 2016 for the tidy sum of $26 billion. That's billion with a B. And since 2016, LinkedIn's membership has grown by 50%. So there's certainly some financial validation of the value of LinkedIn. I see a comment regarding profiles and the need to bolster them, update them, complete them, fill them out. And I think you can find within LinkedIn and through a number of sources good advice in terms of what to do and how to do it. And I'm certainly available afterwards. If you want to reach out to me, I'll provide my contact information. Be more than happy to offer my perspective on that. So what is social selling versus traditional selling? Well, I'll tell you first what traditional selling is in the context of the conversation we're having right now. Traditional selling is cold calling, and we'll spend another minute or so on that here momentarily. But what is social selling? And you'll bear with me because I'm going to read for you a definition of social selling, which is provided by LinkedIn. Social selling is about leveraging your social network to find the right prospects, build trusted relationships, and ultimately achieve your sales goals. This sales technique enables better sales lead generation and sales prospecting process and eliminates the need for cold calling. Building and maintaining relationships is easier within the network that you and your customer trust. And as we talk about social selling, our organization, Keylan, has a very specific and prescriptive approach to social selling. So I've provided you with what I would consider to be a general description of social selling or a general definition of social selling. But in the slides ahead, we'll talk about a very, very specific use of social selling. And by the time we're finished, it's something that you can immediately start to employ. So let's look at the facts. Bear with me while I move some things around on my screen. Traditional cold calling results in about a 1 to 3% conversion rate for getting an initial appointment. So think of it in these terms. If you made 100 cold calls, you would get 1, 2, or 3 appointments. When that same call or email, and by the way, we'll show you how we make a distinction in the use of those. When that same call or email is made with social selling, which is a referral or a mutual connection, the rate jumps to 30%. So from those same 100 attempts, that would mean 30 initial appointments. It's a significant difference. So why is that? So I just draw your attention to the upper right-hand corner here. First of all, your customer organizations are more complex today than in the past. There tend to be more people involved in decision making. On average, 5.4 people involved in the average B2B, that is business to business, buying decision. So it's more complex. Secondly, organizations are better informed. They have access to all the information that's on the internet. It's in the public domain. So as a result, 75% of them use that information. They use social media to be better informed about what vendors offer, what you offer. What that means is it puts greater pressure on you as a salesperson Or if you're a sales manager, on your salespeople, greater pressure to be able to offer new information to prospective buyers, greater pressure to educate prospective buyers. And these buyers, as I've indicated, they're better informed, they're better educated because they have access to so much information. And you know this from your own personal experience. Nowadays, if you're thinking about buying any, I just bought a new dehumidifier. Okay, so that you might say that's a fairly commoditized item. There's lots to choose from. Well, it's just all about price. But you know what? In a matter of 15 minutes, I could become pretty expert in dehumidifiers just by going out onto the internet. I can compare price. I can compare how long will it take it to be shipped to me, and so forth. That's just an example. And then lastly, why cold calling is such a challenge. 90% of decision makers say they never respond to a cold call. That makes your job as a selling person pretty tough. And then also you'll notice at the bottom, and by the way, I'll distribute these slides and my contact information later today to the attendees. So if it's a little difficult to see this, I appreciate that this is a small slide here in the corner. But essentially what it breaks down to is contrasting traditional selling, cold calling, with social selling. And the real difference when you get right down to it is that cold calling is, the tendency is to view your target customer, your target prospect, if you will, in a very broad and impersonalized kind of way. It tends to be kind of just a numbers game. Smile and dial, as the expression goes. Whereas social selling is far more laser focused and personalized. I mean, it's really warm as opposed to cold. It's the difference between trying to strike up a meaningful conversation with a complete stranger as compared with someone you've been introduced to by a mutual trusted acquaintance. So what's the return on investment for social selling? So let's take from an earlier slide. Let's take the data and apply it. Cold calling. So we said there was a 1 to 3% conversion rate between the number of calls and the number of appointments. In my example, I'm going to use 2% as the conversion rate. So let's say your goal was to secure 10 appointments, initial meetings with prospects. Well, if you do the math, in order to get 10, you'd have to make 500 cold calls. And let's say that you could make 50 calls in a day, and that took 4 hours. So you're going to take half of your working day, make 50 calls. In order to make your 500 calls, it would take you 10 working days, fully 2 weeks. It would take you 40 hours, and you'd secure 10 appointments. Now with social selling, there's a couple variations on this, and we'll get into these details here in a moment. But I mentioned earlier that the conversion rate is 30%. By the way, that's the rate that we've found through our experience applying this methodology in our own prospecting at Keylan. And we've also found this to be the case with the clients with whom we work. So let's use 20% for our example. We'll be a little more conservative. And again, we want to secure those same 10 appointments. It would only take 50 emails. And in this case, we've found we don't even have to make phone calls. We can do this by emails, leveraging mutual connections. To send 50 emails takes about 8 hours. So now in 8 hours, we can secure 10 appointments versus the cold calling to get those 10 appointments was going to take 40 hours. And if we use another approach to social selling, which are personal introductions, and again, I'll explain that in a moment, we've found a conversion rate as high as 50%. So securing 10 appointments would take only 20 emails, take about 3 hours to secure 10 appointments. So we've gone from 40 hours to 8 hours to possibly 3 hours to secure 10 appointments. Clearly, return on investment of your time is far better with social selling. So let's take a look at how do we do this. First, and as with all the steps, I'll emphasize, I would really emphasize that you follow them just as we lay them out. But first of all, you have to know your target audience. I suspect that you do, but just to be clear, it's not only the role that your buyer plays, which is depicted on this slide, but it's also what industry are you, or industries are you targeting? What geography are you targeting? What size organization? Whether you base that on revenue or number of employees or whatever criteria you use. So geography, industry, size, and title. So you want to make sure you've defined all of those first and foremost. Then we're going to start thinking about our centers of influence, or COIs. Now, a center of influence basically is someone, it's almost redundant to say, but it's someone that you know who is trusted by another person. Basically, they have influence over the opinion of another person. Now, in my case, there's a gentleman by the name of Art Tuttle, who happens to be in Cleveland, who is an acquaintance of mine, someone with whom I've done business over a number of years. And I happen to know that Art, through his experience, the type of work he specializes in, that he has, as you can see, he has over 500 connections. And I happen to know that he's very well regarded in his field of expertise. So I've identified my target, right? I know what a good prospect looks like. And I now identify one of my centers of influence. And by the way, let me suggest this to you. If your own network of people that you believe can influence others is limited, then not only one of the first things you need to do, but something you need to do and nurture on a regular basis is the health and growth of your network of centers of influence. How do you do that? Well, it can be done a number of ways. One thing to make sure you do as far as nurturing and growing your own network of centers of influence, you must be very intentional about it. So you need to have goals. So if today that you have 5 people that you consider to be centers of influence that you have access to and you can turn to, then you should be looking to double that in a certain period of time. Maybe you want to double that in the next 3 months or the next 6 months. and so on. So be very intentional. And secondly, as you'll see, you're going to be asking your centers of influence to help you. So you want to be reciprocal in terms of this relationship. So to the extent that you'll be asking them to help you, you want to be looking for ways to help them, to make these relationships valuable in a mutual way. But you can grow your network through industry associations, networking groups, chambers of commerce. I mean, virtually, all networking groups have now, if they didn't already have and I said virtually, I guess that was an unintended pun. They've turned to virtual formats. So whereas they may not currently be meeting over breakfast, they continue to meet, and it's because they understand how valuable the relationships are through these networking groups. So I've identified Art as a center of influence, and I find him on LinkedIn, and you'll notice that I'm focused on this hyperlink, which is his connections, because it's Art's connections. So these are some of Art's connections I've displayed here on the screen. It's Art's connections that I would like to be introduced to. It's actually a subset of those connections. It's the connections that fit my profile of a target. So how do I find that subset? On this screen, there's a couple screenshots. These actually come from, I'm using LinkedIn Premium, by the way. I'm not using Sales Navigator, and to get into some LinkedIn parlance there. So these come from two different screens, but you'll notice that what I've done is I've drilled down. I'm going to go back one slide. I have it covered up, but what I did was I clicked on all filters on this slide, and then within all filters, I selected within Art's connections, his first degree and second degree connections, because those are the people he's likely to know best, people with whom he has the most influence. The geography I selected was Greater Cleveland, and I'm interested in those who have a title of president. So you can imagine if there were other titles, I could select additional titles or run this more than once. From that, I get this list. So you'll notice Tim is a president, and Mark is a president, and Rick is a president, and Gina is a president, and so on. So now I've identified a subset of Art's connections on LinkedIn who fit my target prospect profile. And these connections of Art's, I want to determine, to what degree he has influence with. So I have a question here, the difference in between Premium and Sales Navigator. Well, let's see. Sales Navigator is more expensive, but I'm going to give you a very simplified answer. By the way, within LinkedIn, you'll be able to find a comparison of the two, feature by feature. But essentially, with Sales Navigator, it gives you the ability to do more in messages, so sending messages directly to people with whom you're not connected. And some of the search capability on Sales Navigator is a little more powerful. But again, for what I'm showing you today, I'm only using Premium. And if you'd like to discuss that more, we can be happy to do that. You'll have my contact information. Does that help with that question? There we go. Thank you. And thank you. One of our attendees told me that I'm buffering a little bit. So I appreciate that. Let Craig, if that becomes or Cody, if that becomes a problem, please let me know. Okay, so now Oh, I see one more question. Do I use both? No, it's one or the other. So I'm on premium. Yep. Again, I've used Navigator in the past, and I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't. I think it all depends upon what your requirements are. So now what I've done is I'm going to go back one slide. Here is the list of arts connections that fit my target profile, and I'm going to transfer them to a spreadsheet, Google Sheet, Excel, whatever your pleasure. And so basic information, so for my purposes, I list the center of influence, the name of the company, the name of the person. You may very well want to include a column for their title. And you'll notice email and phone, which you may find that on LinkedIn, you might not. So it's probably going to be useful to have their email and phone for this process. So if you're not familiar with this link, Hunter.io, you can use that to get a pretty good idea. I mean, with very reasonable certainty of a person's email address, assuming that they have a business domain. We won't go into the specific use of that, but Hunter.io is free, and you simply put in the name of the company, and what it does is it searches the internet for emails or email addresses that have been posted by people who have that domain as part of their email address. And then another source is Lead 411, but this is something to which you would subscribe, but it's quite good. So it can provide verified telephone numbers and email addresses for individuals. It does some other things, but in this context, that would be what you would be using it for. And I make a comment here that you don't need the email addresses if it's a personal introduction. So let me start to make this distinction between mutual connection and personal introduction. I'm going to be asking Art for his help. If Art sends an email to one of his connections, well, he's going to need the email address in the event that he didn't have it. I mean, he could be connected to someone and not have their email address. It's possible. But I also want to make it easy for Art. But if it's going to be a situation where Art really knows the person well, and he's going to, just send them an email on my behalf, then I don't need to provide it. And we'll show that more specifically here in a moment. So now I've got my list. I'm going to reach out to Art, and you'll pardon me. I'm going to read this because I don't normally advocate that you read what's on a slide, but I think it's important. So I'm going to make an exception here. So I write to Art. Art, hope all is well with you, your family, coworkers. I'm looking to leverage my network for mutually beneficial ways to maximize our relationships. In reviewing your LinkedIn connections, I saw several target contacts that I wanted to reach out to for an initial meeting to understand their business and share our services. I'd like to review the list with you and share how I may do the same for you. Are you available for a brief conversation? Suggest times. So this is my email to Art. So now I'm sitting down with Art, or I'm on a Zoom call or a WebEx or what have you with Art. Art, thanks for taking time to talk with me. Like I mentioned in my email, I've been working on a new approach to grow my business by leveraging my LinkedIn connections and allowing for others to leverage my network for any introductions I can provide them. As you know, not many people want to be bothered with cold calls and emails from salespeople anymore, and are usually not interested in connecting unless it is by way of referral, connection, or introduction. I wanted to review a list of targets that you were connected to on LinkedIn. to see which of these connections you have good relationships with, and if you would be okay in providing me with an introduction. So that's that's the lead in, if you will. And then I would present the list to Art of the names that I've generated through the process I just showed you on LinkedIn. Art looks at the list. Some of the people he may say, this one I don't know. I don't know that well. Oh boy, this person here, I know them really well. Yeah, more than happy to introduce you. Obviously, if Art doesn't already understand the service that I'm offering, I'm going to explain that. Or in your context, if your center of influence doesn't understand what product or service you're offering, you may want to provide that to allow the center of influence to think about how it may apply to their connections. So we go through the list, and Art picks out half a dozen names, let's say, where he feels as if he can make an introduction. He's comfortable doing that and happy to do it. And I want to emphasize again the reciprocal nature of this. So I want to be looking for ways to help Art. Part of the conversation might be getting an update, on his business and, how he's doing in terms of acquiring new clients and so forth. And me thinking through who I know that I can introduce Art to. Likewise, you put yourself in my shoes, you can do the same thing with your centers of influence. So here's the follow-up then, right? Art, thanks for your time the other day. These are the contacts to whom you agreed to introduce me. So you'll see they're listed here. In addition, I've provided an example for you to use when introducing me. Again, I'm happy to do the same for you, so please review my connections and let me know if there's anyone to whom I can introduce you. Now at the bottom, there's an example of an email that Art could just cut and paste into his email to send to the connections that we've identified. And you see that there. Art writes to one of those connections, I'd like to introduce you to Jim, a friend and business associate. He's copied here. This is who Jim is and who he works for. And this is what his organization does. And at the end, I believe you would benefit from an initial conversation. So now I'm leveraging Art as a center of influence for this introduction. He sends the email on my behalf. And so I kind of went ahead and this is what's on the next slide, but it's basically what I read from the last slide. Now, this can be done. Let me back up. Let me explain. This can also be done. There's one of two ways to do this, right? So Art could send the email, and the alternative, if Art is so inclined, is he could pick up the phone and call the prospect. Obviously, if he's willing to do that on my behalf, the probability of me securing an appointment goes up. Earlier in the return on investment, we used 50% as the probability. It's certainly very high probability that I'll get an appointment if Art calls someone he's that closely connected to and asks and recommends they take the time to speak with me. So now Art has made the introduction. This would be where that introduction was made via email. I've been copied on the email. I simply do a reply all. You'll notice I'm using email. I'm not even using the telephone. I do a reply all. I thank Art. The person to whom he's introduced me is Tim. Tim, nice to meet you. And I basically just ask for a meeting. Don't need to explain why I'm calling. Don't need to explain who I am. Our experience is 30% conversion rate. And in our return on investment, we use 20%. And certainly 20% is a lot better than 1 to 3% cold calling. And just, if you do this yourself, you can appreciate how much better this is for your psyche, if you will, right? It's a much more positive experience. It's more impactful. It's a better use of your time. And if you're managing salespeople, likewise. Excuse me, I paged ahead and didn't mean to. Okay. Now, if you're reaching out via phone, let's face it. There are going to be times that you send that follow-up email, in my example, to Tim, and there's not going to be a response. I mean, if you're how shall I say, if you're trying to reach presidents, in my example, these are busy people, right? We've already said decision makers, 90% of them wouldn't even entertain responding to a cold call. Well, that's because they just don't have the time to do that, right? They're focused on other things. So there will be times that they won't respond to an email and you need to pick up the phone, and we've got a script for that. And again, you'll have this when I distribute the deck. So we secure the appointment. That was our goal. Rinse and repeat. Okay? So I did that with one center of influence. This is why it's so critical to grow your network of centers of influence. It's also important to the fact that you want to be reciprocal. Because if I likewise provide introductions for Art's going to certainly be appreciative and be that much more inclined to make introductions. And to the extent that I can help his connections, even more so will he be inclined to make introductions. You can use this same process with your clients. So you may have already thought about your clients, your existing customers, as centers of influence. So how do you do that? So create a list of your client contacts, look for their connections that are targets of yours. And oftentimes, if you sell into a particular industry, your clients in that industry have connections in that industry, right? They belong to industry groups. So they certainly have connections that you would be interested in being introduced to. Again, you reach out to these client contacts for their, to request them to introduce you, and you set appointments. I mean, this really is a variation on asking for referrals. It's one thing to ask a client, who else do they know, but you're really, you're asking them to kind of noodle on that. It's a lot easier if you give them the names and ask them, do you know these people? Well, it's easier yet if they know them because they're connected on LinkedIn. So these are centers of influence that you probably already have. So what do we know? What did we learn? We know that social selling, the way we've defined it, leveraging LinkedIn and center of influence relationships, saves time. We know it's more efficient. We know it provides a warm lead. So we've talked about the likelihood of securing an appointment, but remember, these are better appointments because you've been referred in by somebody your prospect trusts. So you're likely to meet with a better reception even in that initial meeting. It helps you build your pipeline, and it helps you maximize your results. Earlier, we said 90% of executives never respond to cold calls or unsolicited emails, but 84% will engage when connected through a friend or a colleague. You'll notice my contact information on this slide as well. Give me a moment to read this question. Okay, so the question is, can you basically reverse engineer the process? In other words, look at your target prospect, see who their connections are, and see if any of them are mutual connections. Yes, absolutely. I'll just pause here, see if there's any. You're welcome. The questioner thanked me. Okay. Getting some nice feedback here. Well, that's nice of you. Thank you. I'm glad it was helpful. We'll just wait another moment here. While I'm waiting, as I mentioned, I'm going to make sure the deck gets distributed to everyone who took the time to be here. You'll have my contact information. Feel free to call me if you have any questions or email me, whichever is easier. I didn't mention, you see a 412 area code. I live in Boardman, so I appreciate that a number of you found out about this through SBDC and are located in the Mahoning Valley. So I'm a more or less a lifelong resident of the area. I lived away for a number of years, but I've been back for quite a few. I want to thank Craig again for this opportunity, and also thank the Ohio SBDC at YSU for affording me this opportunity as well. I don't, let's see here. Okay, so there is a question. Can you speak to setting goals for how much time, how many contacts you should be reaching out to? So this is a category of metrics. So what I would suggest, so the exercise goes something like this, and again, we can, happy to talk in more detail offline, but you begin by establishing your sales goal. So dollars. So if you're looking at your 2021 goals, you establish your sales goal, and then you break that down. Now, depending upon your business, that may be a fairly simple thing to do. It may be a little more complex. But if, let's say, you're selling a service, and the dollar value of that service, is fairly fixed, then you kind of do the math and you divide the dollar value of the service into the sales goal, and then that tells you the number of sales you need to make. Then you think in terms of, okay, what close ratio am I going to use? You kind of work backwards through your sales process, from closed deals to proposals to initial meetings. And your sales process may be more complex. There may be more steps along the way. But as you work backwards through your sales process, what you end up with is, okay, how many meetings with prospects do I have to have in order to accomplish my sales goals based upon the assumptions that you've made? And, as you go, you kind of do a true up to make sure that you're being realistic. You have so much time during the day. There may be other aspects to your responsibility. In addition to selling, there might be other things that you need to spend time on, and so forth. And by the way, if you're not familiar with SBDC, they have business consultants in their organization who help companies with their planning processes. So to some extent, they may be helpful to you with questions like these as well. So there's another question. As I look at the next question, I want to make sure that I've answered the previous one. So I asked, did I answer that question? But I'm looking at the next one. Oh, good. Okay, good. That was it. So the question is do I see a generational difference in the methods of selling that work best? I would tell you that in a B2B context, I'm not seeing that. And I guess I'm answering the question in the context of social selling as I've defined it. So the process, the method that I just explained, we're not seeing it being more effective, with one group generationally than another. I do notice. So let me kind of step back from that for a moment. So that's that method. But I happen to have a client in the Mahoning Valley, and their business, their sales process is very transactional. So lots of sales of relatively small dollars. And so in order for them to be successful, they really do need to be, they need to employ the telephones, but their targets are extremely well defined. So more specifically, their targets are buyers. They are in procurement. The decisions that are being made are not being made at a strategic level. The buyer already knows. They have an order to fill. So what's really key is to get to these buyers. So it's not a generational difference in this case. It's an industry difference. So that might have been a longer answer than you bargained for, but hopefully I've wrestled it to the ground. I hope so. Let me know. So there's a question here asking me to review some of the steps. If it's okay, I invite you to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to do that for you individually. I think that'd probably be the best way to do that. So respectfully, let's just shoot me an email, or that's my cell number. You can text me, call me, and we'll set up a time. Take, whatever you need to do that. Question. Okay, building a nice profile is also key. Yes. It's a key to building your network, just for starters. So essentially your profile is your brand. And so it's not only who you are, but it's what you represent. And as I indicated, 40% of LinkedIn members are there every day. By the way, this is interesting. If I remember the data point correctly, LinkedIn members spend on average only 17 minutes a month on LinkedIn. So they're there often, but they're there briefly. So that's another reason why having your profile built out is important. And it's also a reason why it's not only the profile, but when I say building your brand, so the things that you post. I talked earlier about educating your prospects. So that education isn't only about what it is that you sell, but it's also about what you know about your prospect's business, about their industry, the trends, the things that impact them. So those types of postings, once you're connected with them, really color their opinion of you, really create in their mind your brand. So yeah, having a nice profile is absolutely correct, along with the postings that you do. Just pausing a moment to see if we have any other questions. It doesn't appear that we do. So with that, I want to thank you for your time and your attention. I will distribute the deck, and I look forward to any opportunity to speak with you in the future if that's of interest to you. Thank you, and have a great day.